And our second reading is from the Gospel according to John, chapter 5, verses 1 through 10. And the word reads, "After this, there was a festival of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now in Jerusalem, by the sheep gate, there is a pool called in Hebrew Bethesda, which has 5 porticos. In these lay many invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed. One man was there who had been ill for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had been there a long time, he said to him, 'Do you want to be made well?' The sick man answered him, 'Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up. And while I am making my way, someone else steps down ahead of me.' Jesus said to him, 'Stand up, take your mat and walk.' At once the man was made well, and he took up his mat and began to walk. Now that day was a Sabbath. So the Jews said to the man who had been cured, 'It is the Sabbath. It is not lawful for you to carry your mat.'" This is the word of the Lord. Now I was not raised in church. I first began attending church in the 1980s. And in my memory, that was not a good decade for U.S. Christianity, for those who came through it. Many criticisms that are leveled today at Christians by non-believers actually rose to public prominence in our religion in that time. As John McCain famously said, a lot of the people who became known as the apostles of intolerance came to the fore. And relativism dominated both our politics and our pulpits. Business schools and the Wall Street Journal cried out, "Greed is good." Do you remember that? Right down here at the Simon School, where I was going to undergraduate, that was taught. They heralded greed as the only real motivator of human beings. Not that we're designed to be creative, designed to be productive, to do good things. No, we're only good if we're greedy. Ayn Rand began her anti-Christian rants, saying that she was here to destroy Christianity because it taught that the strong should help the weak. And she said that was evil. Instead of our Christian concern for the least of these among us, it became popular to scapegoat the poor, right? The problems with America were that these poor Americans who were mired in multi-generational cycles of poverty were dragging the rest of us down. That's how I remember it pretty clearly. And John chapter 5, during that time of moral relativism, became a favorite passage for sermons. And biblical relativists began to assert that no one interpretation is better than any other. And we see the support for the idea greed is good right in here. For Ayn Rand's objectivism, it's right in here in chapter 5. There's a story of an invalid who for 38 years has been waiting to be healed. So Jesus asked him a probing question. Do you want to be well, with emphasis on the want? Do you really want to be well? But the man responded feebly, making excuses for his illness and justifying his conditions, justifying his beggar status. And many preachers then claimed Jesus showed the man the real issue was just poor attitude. If he believed that he could get up, then he could get up. And so he stood up and picked up his mat. And this interpretation is what biblical scholars technically call crappus maximus from the Latin. Yeah, thank you. That's a big load of manure. Don't ever believe that. I want to take this passage back from the biblical relativists of the 80s. I still hear that preached some way these days. It's incredible. Because the really startling thing about a purposeful misreading of John 5 is that John is, without doubt, the most anti-authoritarian, anti-social, most revolutionary of the 4 Gospels. It has been called the anti-social gospel. Scholars say that it uses anti-language and anti-imagery. Now, I don't even know what that means, But the point is, every single passage in John is anti-authoritarian. It seeks to disrupt the established order. Yet blaming a quadriplegic for his own poverty was part of the established order in that day. That's exactly what Caesar and Rome did throughout the empire. The sick and the poor, the fatherless and the husbandless, they're a drag on our great mighty empire. So, to blame this beggar for his poverty, even today, is to literally join forces with those who actually crucified our Lord. Think about that. So what is God saying here in John 5? The main point is that in this man's illness, he has been abandoned by all others. And that was unthinkable in the group culture of ancient Israel. And it happens right in the Jerusalem temple of all places. Okay, this pool is on the temple grounds. And one should expect others to help. But it's right here where he should be receiving the most help that he is cruelly pushed aside. Just because others can. So still believing only the temple can save him, he asked Jesus a question. Will you help me get to the water? And Jesus' concern is not whether he really wants to be well, but does he want to be fully healed? Because full healing means connection to others. Connection. And that's what Jesus offers. Not just connection to those around you, but connection to God. This is actually a statement of how far Israelite society has fallen apart in Jesus' day. When the temple adherents, do you remember the reading from Deuteronomy 26? That's about how part of the temple tithe is supposed to go to the poor. Right? The temple leaders are in charge of helping the poor of Israel. And here's a man sitting for 38 years on the temple grounds and can get no help. And that's because those who work for the temple follow their leader's example. So it's no wonder those stronger and faster shove a crippled old man aside. And an accurate reading of John 5, we see that Jesus condemns this idea of survival of the fittest as a human theory opposed to the will of God. And then Jesus instantaneously heals this neglected man. And as usual, John then records a long, long sermon by Jesus where Jesus says exactly these things. And as an aside, I just want to point out that Jesus' sermon was a lot longer than 15 minutes. I'm not going to make a big deal. Just think about it. So Jesus talks about, although he himself does exactly what God desires, helping the poor, the temple authorities only care about the high priests and the Herodians. They refuse to honor Jesus or even admit he is a holy man. So Jesus goes immediately from the uncaring, selfish treatment of the weak towards the man he just healed. Someone who was disposable in the eyes of many, a throwaway human. Jesus goes immediately from this to the way the Jerusalem authorities reinforce this ungodly behavior. Jesus exposes how political and religious leaders have become caught up in their imitation of Roman culture. What was that called, imitation of Roman culture? Hellenization. Hellenization. And I think the emphasis is on the word hell there. You see, the high priests were able to provide jobs for anyone associated with the temple, and the high priests were appointed by Herod, the political ruler, who had been installed by Caesar. Okay? So the closer you got to Caesar, the more power you had, and the more money you could make. And you just tried to work your way up the social ladder, pushing the others aside. Where have we seen that before? So socially speaking, everyone tried to shove and get those few sweet jobs to become very firmly ensconced in Jerusalem, the city that saw a taste of all the taxes that were collected throughout Israel. And those uncaring competitive leaders were the people who came to Jerusalem, as Jesus says in John 5:43, in their own names, in their own names. And they're received, they're glorified and hailed. You've probably seen the old movies. Ave Caesar, Ave Caesar. They didn't just do that for Caesar. They do that. Ave Herod. Ave Ananias, the high priest. That was your requirement if you owed your job and livelihood to them. You had to greet them like that. But what did they say to Jesus when he came? They didn't receive him at all. So in the first century, those who ran the Jerusalem temple, the center of Jewish life and identity, were pledged to serve those who were most corrupt. They actually worked for the invaders who slowly bled Israel dry. And then when one truly devoted to God came, they could not honor him. They could not glorify him because it would conflict with their pledged loyalty to the Roman occupiers. The mere presence of Jesus exposed the ugly politics that was destroying Israel. And the same thing happens today, doesn't it? We saw James Dobson, the leader of Focus for the Family, spend over $200,000 to oppose biblical teachings on care for God's creation. Why did he do that? Because he didn't want to anger his political friends who were opposed to care for God's creation. He didn't want to be downgraded in status by them. Christ explained this all. How everyone saw the miracles God authorized him to perform. Everyone knew John the Baptizer said Jesus was the Messiah. Everyone knew the scriptures which said the Messiah would come, yet now that he is here, those who should honor him most cannot. The order God intended is broken down. And everyone competes to gain the favor of those who turn away from God. The weak are not helped or cured, but pushed aside. Now, Jesus was not making a mere political statement. I want to clarify that. His words were far more important. Jesus was saying the very way human behavior is ordered is not the way God intends things to be. And I contend you and I are no more free of this sin than those first century leaders. For we still jostle and push as we compete for the best advantages for ourselves and our families, don't we? Did you know if you or your child or grandchild applies for college scholarships, you are competing against wealthy families who enrolled their children in SAT preparation programs starting in 4th grade. For 8 years, they've been getting coaching on the SAT. That's who you're competing against. Or what do you think the Supreme Court decision known as Citizens United is really about? Are you aware of Citizens United? We once had a law co-sponsored by a Republican and a Democrat that limited the amount of money corporations and unions could donate to politicians. But that law was overturned by the Supreme Court, where every single justice can receive favors from corporations without any oversight. And since then, 3 have admitted connections to the very corporations that brought the lawsuit to overturn it. We jostle and push for power and privilege. So here is a chart of how the ancient Roman world worked when Jesus walked the earth. I'm in a different church. It's this side. You see how favors flow down the network. I don't know if you can read this all, but it's a patron-client system. Caesar is in the middle. Everything goes to Caesar. Caesar paid the entire Roman army out of his pocket. There was no Roman treasury. There was only the pockets of Roman rulers. And here are the military people who work for him. You see just some of them over here. Here are the civil people. And then here are the people who oversee all the colonies. And down under Pontius Pilate, we have Herods and the high priest. And then those who live in Jerusalem, who all depend for their welfare on Herods and the high priest, the Herodians. And then out of Jerusalem, the Israelites, those who wish they could work their way a little bit more up the ladder. Now, that is not God's intention, as spelled out from the beginning to the end of the Bible. Let's go to the next slide. Here's the divine patron-client system, right? There's God on the top. God doesn't need anything from us. What's one of the ancient confessions of the church for thousands of years? God is perfect unto God's self. God is complete unto God's self. God needs nothing from us. So we do not have to worry about giving God any power. Power comes from God to whom? To us. Power goes through Christ to the apostles. From the apostles to all the believers all over the world. We are the disciples and apostles of this age. And so since God needs no power, we need send nothing back up to God. Where do we send the favors that power produces? We send it to others. We send it to the least of these among us. We send it to the quadriplegics who sat for 38 years while being pushed aside. That's God's plan. And that works a lot better. You just look at it. It works a lot better than the system of Rome, which we so often imitate in our lives. Jesus said, here is the way that God intends for things to work, at least as far as we can understand. Now imagine if we actually lived this way. Imagine if we lobbied, not for our own interest, but for those who are pushed aside in our society today. What if we cared so much for homeless veterans who make up 2/3 of the nation's homeless, or hungry children, or displaced refugees? What if we lobbied so much for them it became unthinkable to neglect them? That's how the first anti-poverty programs began in our country. Did you know? They were not begun by governments. They were begun by groups of Christians and then handed over to governments. So that today the Spirit of God is literally missing from most anti-poverty programs, while the majority of practicing Christians insist they cost us too much. Which framework is supported the most today? Again, it's not that Jesus or John is merely political. To be political is to think too small. The transforming vision Jesus shares in John is divine. It's unearthly. It's a completely different rewiring of the human ethos. And that is what Jesus extends to us over and over throughout the Gospels and in Revelation. Now here's the question. When Jesus shows up in our lives, which he does again and again if we can just open our eyes to it. When Jesus shows up, who will we honor? Who will we receive? Jesus says our whole way of ordering society, even more, our whole way of thinking and acting is opposed to God's plan. The truth is both wholly terrifying and wildly exhilarating, because if we buy into this, we may lose all we have. Isn't that our fear? But if we buy into this, we might gain more than we can ever imagine. Isn't that the promise? Are we ready to let go of those earthly, worldly connections that anchor us and that give us social prestige? We've often worked hard for them. Can we let all that go and reach for this unearthly vision of infinite glory and power? Because if we can attain this, not even all the time, but just sometimes, if we can realize this even as one small part of the body of Christ, then I suspect a broken world cannot withstand such brilliance. The world will be changed. And here's why the gospel of Jesus the Christ is called good news. With God's help, we can achieve this. We really can. The only question is, do we believe it? May God lead us all to believe. Amen.